Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Star Scholars Leadership Network series. I am your host, Mary McConnor, and today I'm here with Dr. Channing Ford. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Ford.
Oh, happy to.
Yeah, so I would love to start by allowing you to kind of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your higher ed journey and what has led you to the position you're in now, Dean of Graduate Studies.
Okay, so I would say I'm a very unconventional story of how I got into higher ed. I was never one that really envisioned myself being in higher ed. I started off in undergrad really just being kind of grateful to finish my undergrad. I think that's a lot of stories sometimes when I talk to other people in academia, that undergrad was not always the place that they shined. But once they got into graduate school, that they really were able to find their niche, they were able to find who they were as a person. And so I was very fortunate with that. So my background, I consider myself to be a lifelong learner. And so anyone that knows me, I'm also very big advocate for lifelong learning, because I feel like as individuals, we become stagnant if we don't continue to kind of push ourselves to improve ourselves. And when I say that, you don't have to do formal education. You just need to do something like, I know now we like YouTube, TikTok, all these things. Like we want to learn how to organize better. We want to learn how to fix things on our cars so we don't have to rely on someone else to do that. And so as a lifelong learner, I finished my undergrad and I earned 2 bachelor's degrees. So I was at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, so UAB, which was the institution I grew up around because I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. And so I earned a Bachelor of Arts in art history. And so I had finished that degree pretty much up. And then I got to the end and I figured out I have absolutely no idea what I want to do with that degree. And I'm not really sure I want to work in that degree. Right. And so as I was kind of going into that final semester, I said, I need to do something else. And so I ended up tagging on an additional Bachelor of Arts in Mass Communication and Journalism, because at that time I had been working in athletics as a student worker. And so I really enjoyed the pace of that. I had never been athletic myself and still am not. But I really enjoyed getting to see kind of how athletics worked, how they were involved with students and things like that. And so the journalism piece came out because I worked in sports information, and I really wanted to be able to learn how to be kind of that person if that was a career I was going to pursue. When I finished my undergrad, I took a little bit of time. I went to Troy University and was a graduate assistant in athletics, continuing that journey, thinking that was where I was going to go and where I was going to end up. So I guess in theory, I was going to be in higher education, just not in administration. And then I was there for about 9 months. And so I had a family member pass away. And as I was there and I started thinking about it, I was like, you know what? I don't think this is for me. I don't want to travel all the time. I don't want to be away from everyone all the time. And so I couldn't see that as a career. And so I made a very rash decision. I was actually going back down for my final semester of my master's degree. And I went, I need to change my path. And so on the way, I had to drive from Birmingham to Troy, which is about 2 hours. I went, no, I don't think I'm going to finish this. I think I'm going to try something different. Right. And so I had established a really good relationship with my professors in my undergraduate program when I was doing my journalism degree. And so I called my professor, Dr. Larry Powell, who I think is still at UAB and is really well known for all of the political guidance he provides in Alabama during all of the elections. He's a political communication expert. And so I called him on the phone and I said, random question. I know school's starting. Could I get in as a transient student if I got there today and got everything signed? And he said, sure, absolutely. And so I literally got to Troy, quit my GA position. Not that that's a good thing to do. Unenrolled in school, unenrolled from my dorm, got back right in the car, drove back to Birmingham and enrolled at UAB and was in classes the next day. And from there, my path was kind of set after that point. And so I got my Master of Arts in Communication Management from UAB. Then I started working at UAB. And I worked primarily for the first year, I worked in HR, and then I went actually over into the Division of Gerontology, Geriatrics, and Palliative Care, which is where I've spent the majority of my time since then. I've worked in health professions until I got into my position now. And as I worked in that position, I had lots of opportunities to work with physicians and other healthcare providers, and they were very supportive of me, even though I was not a healthcare professional. And so they said, if you want to push yourself, we're going to let you push yourself as far as you can go. And so I became a program director while I was there. I was the education program director by the time I left. So I was working on grants. I was doing grant reporting. I was working with other faculty to develop education opportunities. And so I found kind of my love of faculty at that point because I had worked so much with faculty. I knew I kind of really enjoyed that camaraderie. I loved how they kind of approached things. I liked the fact that they really focused on the things that you should focus on. So you want to focus on the student. You want to make sure the student's having a good learning experience. And so when I got to my time at the end of UAB, it was basically a time where I had to either go on and get my doctorate, or I had to be happy where I was because there was really no other direction. And so I started looking for a position. My grants were coming to an end. So I knew also there was the potential not to have funding, because we all know how soft funding works. For those that work in grants, you have hard funding, which is going to always be there, and the soft funding, which may or may not be there. And so they had told me that they would find something for me on hard money, but I didn't know if I was going to want to do what they wanted me to do. And they had always been really, really supportive. And so I found a position at Auburn University in the Harrison School of Pharmacy. So I went from one group of health professionals to another. And so I was started off at Auburn as an assistant director of the Office of Teaching, Learning, and Assessment in School of Pharmacy. And I immediately started my doctorate. And so I got my PhD is in administration of higher education. And my focus area is really faculty development and teaching and learning behaviors. And so I finished that, and I continued at Auburn for about 6 years in School of Pharmacy. And when I left there, I was the director of assessment. We had rolled out a whole new curriculum, a practice ready curriculum that was competency driven. And so I had really been able to shape kind of what the assessment process looked like for that. And so I got that new experience while I was there. And then about the time, they were also having some shifts around in leadership. I found this position at JSU, and I had always worked with graduate students, and I always loved working with graduate students and, again, graduate faculty. And so, and my family was here. And so I took that opportunity to kind of shift over into graduate education.
Yeah,
that's probably a
nice.
lot.
No, but it's really helpful because, when you think about it, there's no one path to get to a position, and so it's interesting to hear people's story and like how they started. And just so for our listeners to know, Channing and I we went to graduate school together. So we both graduated from Auburn University with our PhDs in higher ed administration. So that's how we know each other. Mm-hmm. And so it's fascinating to hear different stories and how you've gotten to where you are. So let me ask you this, and I know this is probably going to be an impossible question to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What is it like? What is a day in the life for a dean of graduate studies like?
So I think every graduate dean is a little bit different. So during my time at JSU, so graduate education, while I've worked in graduate education before I came to JSU, I had worked in it in a very kind of segmented process because I was within professions, right? So now I deal with all graduate education at my institution. And so what's been really nice is that as part of this relationship, as I've kind of been transitioning into this role and taking on more and more of what that expectation is for a graduate dean, Alabama has a great council of graduate deans that meets quarterly where we can all kind of talk to each other and learn what everybody's doing, learn how kind of people are approaching things. Because as we know, higher education right now is completely in flux, right? Between COVID, we have generational changes, we have, less people coming from high school. Everyone's kind of approaching how they're doing graduate education very, very differently. And so at my institution, we're a smaller regional institution, kind of tucked away in the corner of Alabama. And so we have our programs are primarily our master's level programs. We do have 2 doctoral programs currently online, but our primary focus area is master's. And we also started off as a teacher's college. And so we also do have a fair number of EDS programs, which is, in between the master's and the doctoral programs. And so how we approach graduate education is very different. So how I approach it is very different. And so a typical day, I don't think I have a typical day. Every day is a little bit different, as is anyone in administration, right? So I do a lot with, depending on the time of the year. So I am the academic leader, I would say, for graduate education. Obviously, alongside all of my graduate program directors and program coordinators and obviously other academic deans. But I kind of am I consider myself the glue between all of the administration for that. And so I work with my program directors and coordinators to really make sure that the students are being supported the way that they need to be. So I have the unfortunate job of having to remove students sometimes. But I also have the fortunate job of being able to admit students and allow students to return and to give students second chances and things like that. And so that part of the job I really love and appreciate, because as a student, I can totally understand that things happen. I was not a great undergraduate student, as I think I alluded to. And so I can understand that you hit a bump and that things happen, life happens, events happen that you can't control. And so I do appreciate that part of the job. I don't get to interact with students as much as I would hope to. And I'm hoping as time progresses that changes. Because a lot of it is I really just support our program directors. And again, it's back to that faculty. I support our faculty to make sure that they're supporting the students. I'm also very fortunate that I have a great team that I work with to be able to do admissions and certification. And so we are a very kind of ancillary office. I say we do everything. We're like a little school inside a much larger institution. And so we really are the hub for our graduate students. And so we do curriculum. We work with departments on updating and improving curriculum. We follow students, we track students, we support students. And then of course, we also ensure that they graduate, which is also the more important part. We want to make sure they graduate. And so since I've been here, we've been very, very lucky that we've had just growing graduation classes. So each year, each semester, I have to go to my certification officers and say, what number are we at? And they tell me, and we're seeing record numbers of students complete their programs, which is what I want. I want students to get in and I want them to get out, because I know how important it is. A graduate degree can be a substantial financial change for some people. And so we know that having that master's degree means that they're making more money for their families or they're getting more opportunities. And so I just love to see that part.
Yeah. And you know what, that I'm really glad to hear that you all have seen growth over the years, especially because you touched on something that's really important and it's a reality for us in higher education is there has been this significant shift, right? So we know based on a lot of research that I think it's like half of high school graduates have made the decision that they're going to forego going to college right away, or go at all for some of them. And so I guess I'm curious, and you touched on this a little bit, but can you talk a little bit more about how you all have had to, adjust maybe how you typically recruit and go after students, knowing that there's going to be a significant decline? And I should say go after as it's like, okay, hey, but you get what I'm saying in terms
you do have to go after.
I don't want to make it sound like hunting them down or anything.
So our university is actually a very well-established institution in the state. Growing up, I always knew about JSU, and it wasn't because my mother actually graduated from JSU. That was another reason that I was interested in coming here, is because my mother had gone to JSU because she was from the area, and this was the only school she could go to. And so there's some history there, and it's really fascinating to see how things have evolved. We've actually been very fortunate that our undergraduate class continues to grow. We've had record enrollment. I can't claim any credit for any of that. I don't do undergraduate enrollment, but we've seen record enrollment at the undergraduate level. So I think some of that has factored into kind of seeing our graduate enrollment continue to be steady. I'm going to be honest, we are down a little bit this year, but I think there was an article in the Chronicle, I think in early summer, that talked about everybody's down at the graduate level. COVID was great for graduate education. I think everyone was more at home or they felt more, because they were home and they weren't having to commute and things like that. They felt like they had more time. I don't know if they really did have more time, but because they felt like they could kind of commit to going back to school at that time. And so during COVID, we were up substantially from previous years. And then we've seen a little bit of trickle down since then, but obviously our enrollment still looks good for that. I think some of it too is just being really creative of how you can roll students from undergrad into graduate. And so, nowadays the big thing is accelerated master's programs or 4+1s. And so we do a little bit of that at JSU. We also have an option called Accelerated Senior Privilege, which basically allows an undergraduate student that's a high performing undergraduate student to take some graduate coursework alongside. So it's much like an accelerated master's, but we just don't call it an accelerated master's. So we offer opportunities like that. We also really do try to spend a fair amount of time getting in front of a lot of people to talk about graduate education. And so we do see a lot of returners. They may take a couple of years, go work for a while, but a lot of JSU graduates do actually, undergraduate graduates do come back to do their master's. And part of it is that they love the institution. It's also close to home for them. And then JSU was really forward thinking on a lot of our graduate programs are online already. So when we got to COVID, it wasn't like there was the mad dash scramble of getting everything online very quickly because no one could come to campus because either lockdown or things like that. Our programs had already been developed and had already stood the test of time as being online programs. And so when students hear that nowadays, it's, it's a lot easier to say, well, you don't have to be in Jacksonville, Alabama, which most people don't know where Jacksonville, Alabama is. You can be in Birmingham, or you can be in Atlanta, or you can be anywhere in the state or in the country, or even out of the country, and participate in our programs. And so that's helped us a lot. And then we have some very novel programs. And so we have a very robust emergency management area of expertise. There's not a lot of emergency management programs in the country. They're growing. That's obviously a very interesting field. And so we're seeing more emergency management masters, but we also have, that's one of our doctorates. So we have 2 doctoral programs, and one of them is a Doctor of Science in Emergency Management. And that is a very coveted kind of program because there's like a handful in the country. And so we have a lot of interest in that. And so that's kind of helped with our notoriety because they want to do the master's, and then they want to try to go into the doctoral program. And so it's been kind of a unique blend of a lot of different things have kind of allowed us to kind of keep students interested in JSU, but we're also always looking for new things as well. And so we're really trying to grow our brand. We're really trying to grow interest in other areas of the state, as well as also, constantly looking at new programs to bring online. I think that's also the part that's so important with graduate education is we can't get stagnant. You have to, just like undergrad, right? There's always new areas, new career fields, new things that people are really interested in. And so it's really making sure that you're updating your information and updating your programs and really keeping a good eye on the market to ensure that we know what people want, need, and are interested in.
Yeah, no, and you know what, you brought up some great points, and I'm happy to hear that you all have so many graduates who come back and return for graduate degree programs. So that means you all are doing a great job. Anytime they're like, you know what, I'm going to go back to JSU and get this master's or doctorate I've always wanted to get. So I would imagine, just based on everything you've talked about so far, that collaboration is key in your role. Like you probably literally have to work with every academic department and even various student services departments across the campus. Can you talk about that a little bit? Just the role collaboration has played in your role.
Sure. So collaboration, you're right. Collaboration is key. Everything is about collaboration. There is no I in my job. Everything is, reliant on being able to have good partnerships, good collaborations, good relationships. And those relationships vary, depending on the role. So because of the number of graduate programs, we have 80 plus graduate areas of we have so many degrees, but we have so many areas or concentrations, I guess I should say. So that means I have 80-ish program directors that I'm dealing with regularly. And they're all great, but it's knowing how to respond to each one. Not, we're all unique individuals. We all know what we're interested in. We all know what is kind of our focus areas. And so it's really getting to know those program directors. And you obviously know some better than others because you interact with them more than others, or they're kind of in their niche and they're very happy in their niche, and their program is just kind of working very well as it is, and they don't need a lot of support or guidance. And so they kind of keep going on and on. And then you have those that are looking to revamp And so, being able to kind of be that resource for them, obviously never the authority, because I would never assume I know anyone's discipline better than they do. I know my area, as we all do. But being able to support them and help them and give them feedback, and so much of that is so important, is just being kind of that person that can be there for them to just even brainstorm. I have found, it's just great to get into a room or on a Teams call or even an email and just go back and forth and be like, I was thinking this. What do you think about that? Can you give me feedback on this and that? Because sometimes it's also that outside perspective that's so important. Because you think you're explaining everything really, really well, and you probably are, but someone who's not familiar may have absolutely no clue what you're trying to relay. And especially with our students, students don't, they know that they're interested in an area, but that doesn't necessarily mean they completely comprehend what that's going to mean for them down the road. And so sometimes it's nice to have that person that's not in it all the time be able to provide that feedback. So I work with my program directors a great deal. I meet with them quarterly, well, twice a quarter, really. So 2 times each semester. We still do function a lot kind of like undergraduate education, where summer is really not everyone has a graduate class going on in the summer. I'm hoping we'll change that over time. But I do meet with them twice a semester, the major semesters, because I want to make sure that A, they know what we're doing in our office, B, that I know what they're doing. And to also just keep them up to date with things that are changing, policy shifts, curriculum changes, and things like that. So that's really great. That's how I interact with that group. I'm also obviously the dean. So I have Dean's Council is what we call it at our institution. And it's our associate vice president and provost it's her group. And so we meet every other week, so twice a month. And so I hear from the deans kind of about what's going on in their colleges. They let us know a lot about kind of what they're thinking about new programs. And so I've only been at JSU for about 2 years. Well, I had my 2-year anniversary August 1st. So we're heading into year 3. And so I'm still kind of getting used to the deans, and the deans are still getting used to me of how I can help them and support them as they're developing new programs. And so I've been really fortunate to work with the associate vice provost and the vice provost very closely, going through documentation for SACS, our state accreditor, AIC, to really be more involved in the development of courses and curriculum, and as well as obviously programs. And so programs are so specific and different. My area of expertise, along with my doctorate, is I have a graduate certificate in program evaluation, and then also I have a certificate in college and or university, college, and teaching learning. Like, that is not right. University and college teaching. I'll get it right. And so, I have weird pockets of additional knowledge. And so as I've been working on proposals with them, I'm able to kind of help them beef up sections that they weren't trained to do. Obviously, being in higher ed, as Mary, you have a different skill set than someone who is trained to be a nurse, or someone who is trained to be a kinesiologist, or everything like that. And so I always look at those relationships as a great opportunity to collaborate and to help support them. And so that's been really helpful, I think, for both me, because it gives me additional knowledge and I learn more and more about kind of our programs. But it also helps them too, to know that they have someone they can go to get feedback for. And then for our student services, because most of our students are online, they don't utilize a lot of student services on our campus because they're not really on our campus. But we do obviously work with aspects of our student success. So we have a very robust student success group on campus. And so we do utilize them to some degree just for communications and also alerts and things like that. So I know that retention is really important. Student progression is really important. It's very important even at the graduate level, because even though they're shorter programs, you still want to keep them moving along. And so, we utilize their services to kind of help support and ensure that students are being updated and kept aware, and also being able to have faculty members report back if they're not hearing from students. And so they're able to add that additional layer of support to reach out and say, hey, we noticed that you haven't been in communication for a while. Can we help you? Is there something we can do as an institution to support you? And so those pieces, I think, are the really important piece. And then obviously we have counseling services as well that are available to our graduate students. So they've really done a great job figuring out how to do telehealth also through our counseling services, because they know so many students may not be on campus, and that we want to make sure that we're able to support our students who are off-site as well.
Got it. Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. And so I guess as a follow-up, what are three things you've learned about yourself, over the past 2 years since you've been in this role?
Um, I do much better with change than I thought I did.
Right.
Um, every day is a change. And I think every position is that way. I will say every job I've ever had, there's been a lot of change. But there's a lot of moving parts. So as I have noticed, as I've moved up in leadership, your leadership role in a smaller department is different than in a larger school. And then it's much different when you're at an institutional level. And so being able to communicate really well, and to understand how to approach things is very, very important. And so I would like to think that I'm a better mediator than I used to be. Because, one way is not always the right way, right? There can be multiple ways and different approaches. And so I think some of that is trying to figure out what's going to be the best for the student, but also be best for the institution at the same time. And so I think mediation, I would hope that I've learned to be a better mediator. Also realizing that sometimes you just have to pick it up and do it yourself, which I think, again, every educator knows that as well, is that sometimes you just have to figure out how to do it yourself, because while you may have someone that's their role, if something happens, COVID taught me a lot. I think my first 4 months I was here, my whole office was out with COVID. I was
Oh,
the only one here.
oh
And it
no.
was like Thanksgiving-y time frame. So it was the end of the semester. And I think I had literally been here about 3 or 4 months, and everybody else was home quarantined, but somehow I missed it. Like I wasn't close enough to the person that had to be quarantined for. And it was just, learning on the fly of like, I can do certification. I mean, I think to some degree I'm old school. I always used to kind of follow along with my plan of study anyway, when I was in undergrad and grad school, and also my doctoral program. I had my little planner. So, really learning how to do certification, and the really kind of attention to detail that's needed for that. Of, when you're doing it for yourself, you're like, well, someone's going to check behind you. But when you're the person that's serving in that capacity for students, you got to be right. You got to make sure you're right. And so, I learned a lot about my staff. And so, I would say that, kind of being adaptable is really important for that. And then also, just appreciating what you have is really important. I have a great team. I could never wish for a better team. I got here, they had all, with the exception of, we do have 2 new people that have entered my office since I've been here. But when I got here, everyone had been here for years, and they had multiple people in my role during their time here. And so I was just another person that they were like, well, we'll see how she does and if she stays. And so, because people get promoted and they move into different roles, and it's academia, right? We're always kind of looking to be able to take on new challenges and new things. And so when you get offered an opportunity, oftentimes you're like, well, I want to take that opportunity because it gives me a new skill set. And so when I came in, they had been here, and they were just so welcoming and warm, and just, it took us a little bit of time for us to get to know each other, but, they've really been great about acclimating to how I work. And then I've been trying to acclimate to theirs, and they've been really good about changing process. And so, that's been a really fortunate thing of trying to figure out how to come into an established organization and really kind of not change it, because you don't always want to change everything, but figure out how you can work collaboratively.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, so another question I have for you, because a lot of people may not know that you're also a researcher, and we've co-authored a publication together, and then additionally, you have taught classes. You've been an instructor. So I guess I'm curious to know: are you still teaching and conducting research? Like, do you have time at this point?
So it's more challenging now. I will say that as you go, I can understand now more so. I never understood before when I was younger, of like when people are like, well, that's just, I got to figure out if I'm going to be able to commit. Because that would always be the thing, is that anytime you wanted to work on a project and you went to someone above you, you'd be like, I really want you to be on this project. And they're like, I gotta look at everything and see if I can commit to that. And I can understand that more now, being in my role, because the day goes very quickly. But yes, I do still research, and my area still is really looking at teaching behaviors, but it has expanded as well. So I've somehow become somewhat of a generational theorist, not an expert in any which way. But I'm actually I'm co-authoring a book right now on generational theory. It's generational theory driven. So it's looking at Gen Zs and millennials and how they're impacting the classroom, because I think that's something that we're not really talking about anymore, is that millennials are starting to come back, especially into graduate education, as they're wanting to increase their job opportunities and things like that. And so now it's not just Gen Zs who are going to be in the classroom. It's going to be, and I think graduate education has always been a bit of a blend. But while Gen Zs and millennials are similar, they are also very, very different. And so, we're working on this book, and so it's actually due November 1st. That date's getting closer and closer every day. And then I've done a couple of special issues for New Directions of Teaching and Learning. So I really enjoy that publication. That's the one actually we discovered during one of our our doctoral courses. It was my first course I took in my doctoral program. And it's just such a nice journal because it really gives the perspective of educators. So instead of it being like, this is exactly what you should do, this is the only way to do it, which we know not all articles are that way, but a lot of articles are kind of telling you this is what you should do. New Directions does a nice job of really giving perspectives and kind of helpful hints and ways to kind of, if you can't do it all, here's little things that you can do to implement in the classroom. And so we released a special issue last year focusing on professional identity theory. So that's another area that I'm really interested in. And then we have actually an ongoing new issue that we're working on right now, focusing on mentoring, because that's a piece I've learned, or I have discovered, at least at my institution, that mentoring has really changed. And the challenges of doing good or of being a great and strong mentor when your program is primarily online. And so, mentorship is a big component of my interest right now, just because I feel like I'm sure Mary, you would agree, I had a fantastic mentor through my doctoral program. I actually send him emails now still to this day telling him of my love of him, because at the time he frustrated me to death at times. Because he's like an older version of myself, and he pushed me and he was like, are you really happy with that? But he supported me, and he really made sure that I was prepared when I was finishing my doctorate. And then he supported me after I finished my doctorate. So he really kind of took me under my wing, knowing I was never going to be a traditional educator. Being that I had never been a traditional educator before that, I teach classes here and there. When I was at Auburn, I taught the introduction, I think it was STU 101 at Auburn. Or something like that. It's the introduction class that we have all freshmen come through to prepare them their life skills as they go into college. I teach that here. I've taught that last year. I'm teaching it again this year as well, because I feel like, it's an opportunity to kind of meet students, so you stay aware of what they're thinking, what they're feeling, especially with each new cohort. But also I enjoy interacting with students. I enjoy getting to share my story. I enjoy hearing their stories. And the STU kind of classes are I think ours is called student success now. It's a nice way to help support them, and also say, like, here's how you engage with your faculty member, because not everyone, we have a lot of first generation students. They don't understand that the PhD at the end always means it's a doctor. And so they'll be like, hey, Jim, how you doing? And you're like, no. No. And so, but before they get into that scenario, you're able to kind of coach them and say, you need to be proactive, not reactive. You need to tell your faculty member when you're not going to be, if you're sick, you need to tell them. Don't wait until after the test happens. Which, I never had that going through college, but I can see the value of that now, because it at least provides them some basic kind of understanding for kind of like how to navigate the experience. College can be very daunting, especially if you're coming from a rural area where everybody has always known everybody, and you're in a tiny little school, and then you're thrown in with, thousands of other people who have done dual enrollment, or they've done other things, and they know how to engage with faculty member, and you may just feel like, oh, well, I don't want to bother them, or I don't want them to think I don't know. And so it gives them a safe person for that. But yeah, research is still a big goal. And so I've tried to figure out ways to roll that in with my day-to-day. So, now it's more like surveys with faculty, surveys with students, or focus group with faculty. or focus groups with students. And then I try to maintain, I have a very rich collaboration group from the institutions I used to work at. So that's the other piece I think is so important for, especially junior administrators to realize that you need to maintain those relationships as you cross institutions, because much like I'm talking with Mary today, the relationships you establish, you want to maintain those, one, because you have the relationship, you would want to keep it anyway, you want to be friends, you want to be close, but it serves as a nice support group to where you have a perspective outside of the institution you're currently at. And it also just makes you a better researcher. You want to make sure that you're able to provide perspectives from other places. You don't want your population to always just be your institution. You want to see how your institution compares to other institutions. And two, it just, it makes for a really robust CV in the end. To some degrees, it's just about that as well. You want to make sure that when you go and look for that next new position, that you can show that you're able to have the resources you need. We're talking about promotion and tenure. I don't have that problem, but when others do, when you go up for promotion and tenure, when you start getting to the professor rank, you got to have outside people to write you letters of recommendation. And so you want to make sure that you're able to have those people that are going to be able to speak to the greatness that, the great person that you are, the great researcher, the great academician, the great teacher, all of those things. And so having those relationships, they need to start early, and they need to be maintained, and they need to be nurtured. Having kind of I knew them 20 years ago, I'm sure they'd write me a letter. Well, the letter that you would get from just knowing them 20 years ago and the letter you would get from having that well-established relationship for the 20 years, it's going to be vastly different. And also, you never know what opportunity they may provide for you.
Yeah, no, that's excellent advice. And that was actually going to be one of my questions for you in terms of, people wanting to transition, because most of our members, just so you know, are, they're on the faculty side or they're researchers. And then we do have some students as well. So for, faculty members and researchers who are wanting to transition over into administration potentially, that was going to be my question. What advice do you have for them? I guess in terms of professional development too, like what do you think are some good professional development opportunities for them?
So I think you have to look at what your institution offers, and then you have to look at what's outside. So I know no one loves serving on a committee. We're very, in higher ed, we are very committee driven. But being on a committee is really important. And I say that as sometimes I am the worst committee member. But you want to make sure that you're able to establish relationships, because what I have found over time is that professional development opportunities differ by college, or differ by institution, or differ by department. Some do a more in-house ingrained professional development opportunity. Some obviously, I think every university nowadays has some type of teaching and learning. But again, that's driven towards the education side of the house. It's not always, if you're not a tier, if you're not an R1 or an R2 or, a research driven institution, there's not always training in place at your institution to really support that development. And so identifying collaborate, that's also the part where collaboration is so important. We talk about that a lot at our institution. We're not an R1 or an R2. And so, any of us that are really interested in research or interested in grants, we have to have those conversations very, very early about what kind of infrastructure do we have in place to support that? And would it be better to collaborate with another institution and be a practice site or a clinical site for them, or, an additional data hub or things like that? And so I think some of that is really important, is of when you're looking at what you want your career to be, that you first identify what is your main goal, and then looking at what your institution provides for you, and then what's going to supplement that. And the positive about that is, when you're a brand new faculty member in most disciplines, not all, the health sciences are a little bit better funded. There are research grants that are for training. So medicine was really big about that. They would always have these K awards or, postdoc awards and all these lower grants that were really just for brand new faculty to really become a better researcher. And I knew many faculty that would go back and get their master's. They would get a master of science in public health because they were trained to be a physician. They weren't trained to be a researcher. This is back where we're like, our degree trained us to be educators, but not, my kinesiologist was not trained to be an educator. She was trained to be a kinesiologist. And so the doctor or the MDs or DOs would often go back and find some kind of career award that would help cover the cost of going back and getting an MPH or an MSPH, so that they could grow their understanding of the research process, the understanding of data analysis, and all of those things. And oftentimes the award would at least pay for, taking time out of the clinic or things like that. But there are awards like that for other disciplines as well. So I think identifying, that part of mentorship is going to be so important. And even when you transition into a faculty role, the mentorship should still be there. And so, the academy was really, way back. Academia was designed to support educators and to grow educators and to keep the knowledge moving forward. And I think nowadays it's hard. We're very isolated. We're very siloed. And so, it's really figuring out, the mentor that you need for each piece of your career. And it may not just be one mentor, it's identifying every mentor. And so I was really, again, I hate to say, I've been very, very fortunate. I identified mentors in my very first, I call it professional job. When I worked in the Division of Gerontology, Geriatrics, Palliative Care, I had 2 or 3 physicians who I just had really good relationships with and helped mentor me. They helped guide me. They helped me write my first peer-reviewed publication. They helped me, get, training in all these different areas. They helped me make sure I was able to present at conferences. They supported me to present, at national conference, regional conferences, all of these things. They supported me putting together proposals. They supported me doing posters and things like that. And so finding that person that can help guide you is really important. And it's the same as they might be great for your research, but you may need a different mentor for that. And I think some of that is the professional development we don't talk about. A lot of times we're like, well, go to that workshop or go to that conference. And those are great. And you should definitely go to conferences, especially with COVID. I think we can all agree the virtual conference is not the same as the in-person conference, right? You never realize how much you're like, oh, I want to ask a question, but I don't want to ask a question in the chat feature. Cause I don't want someone to think I don't know how verbalizing it doesn't make us feel as weird, but I can see myself as I'm typing a question going, but are they going to understand what my question is? Cause I'm not there to kind of make, I guess, the facial cues to understand my question. And so, those parts are really important, but it's that mentoring and that guidance and those peers. And I think the peers is the other piece, is that we should never be afraid to go to someone else. And so that's part of my research collaboration is I am more of a qualitative researcher. I like the story. I want to tell the story. I like numbers fine, but numbers don't always like me. And so I have someone on my manuscripts that is a quantitative researcher that can do data analysis and make sure that my interpretation is the correct interpretation. Because I just never, that part of research never clicked with me. I understand an N, I understand why we want a good p-value. I understand the value of that, but I want you to tell me why you didn't like something. Right. I don't want a Likert scale. And again, I value the Likert scale, but I want the story. And so I've always been drawn to the narrative. I've always been an avid reader. I'm always the person that when the book ends, I'm like, but why did we end there? And so I think that's the piece also, is to make ourselves more robust and more holistic of how we approach things. We need those peers to be by our side saying, well, what about this? Or what about that? And I sometimes say you need a good adversarial peer. You need someone who's going to question it. And understand it's a safe space, as we like to say it. And it's for a good reason. You need that person to push back and say, is that the best approach? Should we really approach it that way? And I think that's when good research happens, is when you don't get so ingrained in what you're comfortable with and that you're always pushing yourself.
Got it. Yeah. Oh, you touched on so many great things. I'm like, yes, the mentorship. Yes. The accountability. Yes. Work with people.
Accountability is also important.
Yeah, but just yourself enough to say, you know what, I am more of a qualitative researcher, therefore I need to collaborate with someone who where their strength is quantitative research. Just you just touched on so many things, and I know we're like almost out of time, but I just want to say thank you so much. And do you have any other closing thoughts for our listeners in terms of, because some of our listeners too don't work in higher education and they may be considering going from an industry position to academe. So like, what advice would you have for that person?
I think find what you're interested in. I think oftentimes we limit ourselves to thinking that I wouldn't be good at that, or that might, I can tell you, 20-year-old me would never in their world think I would be where I am now. And I can tell you, I have friends from high school that I still speak to that every time I talk to them about my job, they're like, how did you end up there? And so I think, it's important to push ourselves. I think it's also, academia is a very rich environment. And I think this other thing to think about is that every institution is very different. I can tell you the 3 institutions I've been at, I was at a massive R1. I was at UAB for a very long time. They are a massive R1. They're a very health driven. I mean, they're a healthcare facility. They're like the number 1 healthcare facility in the state. They have a large contingent. The hospital basically ate Birmingham, and they're happy about that. And so I came from that institution to Auburn, which at that time was more of an R2. It became an R1 while I was there. And so it was an interesting culture change. And then I came to JSU, which is a much smaller school. And again, a very different culture change. And so I think it's important not to think of academia or higher ed as being all the same. And I think sometimes when we see news articles and things like that, it's like you hear the really great things about higher ed, or the really not great things about higher ed, or things that happen in higher ed. It's not necessarily that higher ed's not good. It's more of the, there's always the outlier. And so I think you have to kind of look at each institution as its own special entity and really figure out if that's the place you want to be. Because higher ed is, there's a goal. The purpose of higher education is to prepare the next generation to be able to take over and be able to guide the future direction of the next generation. And so, education is so important that you really need to be passionate about it and really be invested in it. But also the same side is there's the other side of the house. If you're at a major research institution, that you're not really doing as much education, you're doing research because you're going to change the world through the research that you're doing, and we need you to. And so I think it's really kind of, you have to pick your institution very strategically. And then also identify how you can contribute. Because I think if it's really, it's hard in higher education to be like, it's a job. Because I don't think many people say it's just a job. It's every day. It needs to be a passion. It needs to be something that you're really invested in, because to do what you do and to support people and to support the mission of the institution, you have to really feel like you are a part of the institution. And so you need that passion, that love, and not every day is going to be a great day, but that's true everywhere. But you do need to make sure that you're going to want to invest the passion that you have in the place that you're going to be. Yes. I'm not sure that answered your question, Mary, but that was fine.
I love that. No. And you know what? I can say that I wholeheartely agree with that. Like, you have to feel like your values align with the mission, and it makes a huge difference in the work you do. Like, you're more invested. And so I think that's excellent advice. So let's end it just one more time. Like, we'll put that plug in there. You said you have a book coming out, right? What's the name of the book again?
Oh no, you're going to tell me. I have no idea what the official title is. I want to say it's navigating millennials and Gen Zs in higher education is what I want to say it is.
Okay.
But it's something like that.
All right, everyone. So be on the lookout for Dr. Ford's book that's coming out soon. And again, thank you so much for your time today. And we really appreciate all of the different, advice and insights that you've just provided, because I always go back and listen, and I'm always like, yes, that's such good advice. So yeah, no, I want to thank you so much for your time today.
Well, I appreciate you having me.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.